Are you working on a memoir or have you thought about writing a memoir? Maybe you had something happen and you've had all of these people in your life saying, you should write a book about that. And I get it. We've all had traumatic, hard, amazing things that have happened to us in our life. And we want to write down the lessons so that other people can learn those. Hell, I've even written my own memoir along with nonfiction how-to and a novel. And this is why I think that writing a memoir is the hardest thing to write. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 4 reasons memoirs are so hard to write. And I'm going to show you how to overcome these difficulties and turn your personal story into a great book. My name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, and I am the author of The Threshing, Running Down a Dream, and Your First 1,000 Copies. My partner, Sean Coyne, is the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and everything I teach in this video and everything we do here at StoryGrid is based on his 30 years of experience writing, editing, and researching. A few years ago, I was telling my wife about this book idea I had. I wanted to write a book about what it was like for me to leave the religion of my youth. For me, this was a harrowing tale. This was something really hard for me to do. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. It changed the life of my kids and everybody I was in relationship with. And so I wanted to write this down. I wanted to write a memoir. And I was telling my wife about it. And when it came time for her to give her feedback, she very lovingly, very kindly said, "But Tim, there's just one problem. Your story's not that interesting." Now, once I recovered from the shock of this statement, I realized she was right. Because if you just turned down the volume of my life and followed me around and watched me move away from my religion and give this thing up, it was really boring. It was a lot of conversations in coffee houses, reading books, journaling, praying, all very boring things to watch. And then I heard the story of Megan Phelps Roper as she escaped the cult of Westboro Baptist Church, and I realized that's an actual interesting story. And this brings me to reason number 1 why memoirs are so hard to write, is that most of our stories are just not that interesting. Now, of course, they're interesting to you, and my stories are interesting to me because internally, these are harrowing tales. These are the hardest things we've ever gone through, and yet, externally, just watching, they're kind of boring. They're not really that spectacular. Now, I'm going to tell you how to overcome this particular problem at the end of this video, so hang in there. But this is the number 1 reason your memoir probably isn't going to work, is that your story is just not that interesting. Reason number 2, your memoir is not going to work, is that you don't have enough objectivity about what happened. So I love this quote. If you're going to share widely, make sure you're sharing from your scars, not your open wounds. So many people try to tell their story too soon. They haven't processed what happened. They haven't got far enough past it that they can look back and have some objectivity. If you're still in the middle of what happened or it was really recent, this is what journaling is for. You should absolutely write it down, but you should be journaling, not trying to put it in a form for public consumption. And speaking of objectivity, this is always going to be hard because it's hard to look at our own story and suss out what we find important and what other people will find interesting. So most people, when they're writing their memoirs, they mistake writing down what happened for writing a great book and telling a great story. And this is why you need objectivity. You need to be able to stand back far enough, look at your story, and understand the parts that you just need to cut because they're not interesting, they don't add to the story, they're not on theme, and the parts you actually have to keep. And this means people that you love, you're going to have to cut out of the story. That really hard thing you went through, that doesn't belong in there either. And so you need to have enough objectivity from what happened before you actually try to write it down for public consumption. Reason number 3, your memoir isn't going to work, is because memoir is like fiction, except you don't get to just make shit up. At StoryGrid, we actually treat memoir as fiction. We put it in that same category, not because we're making stuff up or it actually is something that didn't happen, but because it has to abide by all the same rules as fiction. You got to have your genre right. You got to have your 5 commandments of storytelling. You have to have your objects of desire and everything else I talk about on this channel. And the problem is, if your story doesn't have those elements, you can't just make it up and put it in there. You have to figure out how to tell the true story, but in a way that works just like fiction does. So memoir has to abide by all the rules of fiction, except you're bound by the finite number of things that actually happened. And reason number 4 that memoir is really hard to write and probably not working is that you are the protagonist. In all other forms of nonfiction, this isn't the case. So if we look at something like how-to nonfiction, the protagonist is actually the reader. This is why it's mostly written in second person, is because we're telling you, the reader, what you should and shouldn't be doing. That's actually what these videos are, right? This is how-to. I'm talking to you and I'm telling you what you should be doing. And then if we look at other nonfiction like history or biography, the protagonist or the characters in the story are real people that lived a long time ago, but we're just talking about those people and what happened to them. But in memoir, you are the protagonist. And who suffers the most in every story? The protagonist. And so this is why writing memoir is so hard, is you have to make yourself suffer on the page. You have to put all of your failings and your F-ups and everything that you did wrong on the page and let the reader follow along and watch you as you suffer. And this is really hard to do. We already want to hide our insecurities and hide things that we did wrong. The idea that we're going to bleed that onto a page for other people to consume is really, really hard to do. So yeah, maybe at the end of your story, you're the hero and you figured out something really great or something amazing happened. But that's at the end. Most of the book is going to be taking the suffering that actually happened in your life and writing it down for other people to watch. And again, that's really hard to do. So memoirs are really hard to write. Again, I think they're the hardest form of writing to do because, first of all, most of our stories are just not that interesting. And if your story is interesting, you probably don't have enough objectivity to know which parts are actually interesting and which parts you should cut out, or you're still so close to what happened, you can't kind of suss out what's interesting versus what was important to you. And then, of course, you are held by the finite idea of what actually happened. If the story isn't working, you can't just make something up and put it into the story. And then finally, what I think is the biggest deal is that you're the protagonist, and it's really hard to write your own suffering onto the page. So what do we do about this? What do we do about the fact that memoirs are so hard to write? How can you overcome these things? Well, I feel like you've got 2 options. The first option, keep working on your memoir. Obviously, writing memoir is possible. You have probably read a lot of great memoirs. There are wonderfully written memoirs that I'm just so glad exist out into the world, and yours could be one of those. So if you know that your story needs to exist as a memoir, don't use this as a reason not to write your memoir. Actually, just use this as a way to understand why it's so hard and look at some of the obstacles you have to overcome in writing your memoir. The second option, and this is what I think most people should actually do, and this is what I ended up doing, is I switched to writing fiction. The first thing this does is it allows you to fix that first problem that our story just isn't that interesting, because internally it was extremely dramatic, but externally it just wasn't. Well, if you switch to writing fiction, you can keep all of that internal drama, and then you get to make up an external story that is really dramatic and exciting and fun for the reader to go through and read, but it's actually an interesting story, and you can just make one up that fits the internal lessons you're trying to teach the reader. So just by switching to fiction, you make your story more interesting than what probably actually happened in real life. Also, it gives us some distance in ways that are really, really important. First of all, the protagonist is no longer you, it's this person you made up. And so when you have to make them suffer and put all of their failings on the page, it's not your personal failings, it's that protagonist's failings, right? So you can actually get some distance and make this other person that you just made up suffer instead of putting your own suffering on the page. The other thing it does is gives you some objectivity. We are not critiquing your story. We're not editing your story. We are editing and critiquing this other story that you wrote down. That's fiction that you just made up. So it's a lot easier to look at it objectively about what needs to be fixed, what needs to be added and taken away, instead of what you have to do for your own story, which of course leads us to that final thing, which is you can just make it up. You are not bound by the finite amount of things that actually happened in the real world. If you need a new story element, a new character, a new arc, whatever you need, you can just make it up and add it into the story. And so many times the lessons you want to put in your book, that internal struggle and growth that you have that you want to put in your book, it would much better be served by a fiction story where you can craft this story to fit those ideas to perfection than trying to turn your own story into a memoir. So whether you're going to keep writing your memoir or you're going to write fiction, we are here to help. That is what this channel is all about. So make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you get notified of all future videos. And of course, we already have a lot of videos here on the channel, so make sure you go back and watch those as well. They're going to help with your writing a ton. If you want to continue to dive into our resources, make sure you go to storygrid.com, sign up for the newsletter. That's where we send out everything we're doing. We got lots of other resources available there as well. So go to storygrid.com and check that out. But as always, thanks for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.